In 4 years of marriage, she had never asked him for a single thing. Not money, not jewelry, not mercy for anyone, not even for herself. So when Verity slid a folder across the breakfast table and asked Ivo Karas for a divorce, he assumed she had finally found someone worth leaving him for. He almost signed it. Then he saw the tremor in her hand, the river silt dried under her fingernails, and the fact that she had packed nothing at all. What he found when he followed her did not end the marriage. It started a war. The house sat on a spit of black rock at the mouth of the harbor, glass on 3 sides, built by a man who had wanted to be seen. From the breakfast table, you could watch every hull that came into Ashport and know exactly which ones belonged to you. Ivo Karas had bought the house for that view. In 4 years, he had never once used it. He ate, looking at his wife. Verity moved through the kitchen the way she moved through everything, without waste. She filled the pot. She set his cup down at his right hand because he wrote with his left, and she had noticed that in the first week and never once forgotten it. She put out the small tin of butterscotch she carried in every coat she owned. The same dented tin. The lid softened at the hinge from years of thumbing it open, and she pushed it 2 inches toward him without looking up, because he had a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when he was thinking, and the sweets stopped him doing it. She had never told him that was why. He had worked it out himself in the 2nd year and had never mentioned it, in case mentioning it made her stop. The wall screen was running the numbers out of the container terminal. Eva watched them scroll and did not read them. On Friday, the Hallorans were coming down from Providence to sign a peace that had taken him 19 months to build. 19 months of dinners, of concessions, of swallowing insults with wine. On Friday the docks would be quiet for the first time since his father died in them. He had begun to think of it as the end of something. He had not yet decided what. "You have the Halloran lawyers at 4, Verity said. "They will try to move the arbitration clause again. Do not let them. It is the only clause in the whole treaty that costs their family anything. You read it. I read everything." She poured her own coffee. She drank it standing, always, as though she were not entirely convinced the chair belonged to her. That was the thing about Verity that Ivo had never solved. 4 years ago her father had died, owing his family a debt that could not be paid in money, and the settlement of that debt had been a marriage. She had walked into it dry-eyed and 26 years old, and she had not cried, and she had not begged, and she had not asked for a single concession. He had offered her a car, and she took the bus. He had opened an account in her name and put more money in it than most men see in a lifetime, and 4 years later, the balance had not moved by $1. He had asked her once early what she wanted from him. "Nothing," she had said. And then, after a moment, as if it were an afterthought and not the whole architecture of her life, "I would just like to be useful." She had been more than that. She was the one who found the skim in the harbor master's numbers when 3 accountants had missed it. She was the one the men went quiet around, not out of fear but out of a strange, unspoken respect, because she remembered their mothers' names, and she never once repeated anything she heard. She had no title. She had no soldiers. She had never carried a weapon in her life, and every man in the Karas organization would have walked through fire before he lied to her. "Ivo," she said. He looked up. She was standing on the other side of the table with a plain manila folder held flat against her stomach, both hands on it, the way you hold something you are afraid of dropping. "There is a thing I need," she said. He set his cup down. In 4 years, she had opened perhaps 3 sentences that way, and each time it had been about someone else. A widow's rent, a boy who needed to be let go instead of buried. "Name it," he said. She put the folder on the table. She turned it once with 2 fingers, so it faced him, and she stepped back out of reach. He opened it. He read the first line, and then he read it again, because the words had arranged themselves into a shape his brain refused to hold. Petition for the dissolution of marriage. Her name typed neat and small in the box. His name beneath it. A pen clipped to the corner of the page, a cheap plastic thing from a chemist's. because she had not even brought a good one, because she had not expected this to be a ceremony. The kitchen made a sound. The refrigerator, cycling. It was very loud. Say it out loud. Ivo said, I am asking you for a divorce. He did not move. There was a stillness that came over him in the moment before violence, and every man who worked for him could recognize it across a crowded room. And Verity, who knew him better than any of them, did not flinch from it. She stood there with her chin level and her hands empty, and she let him look at her. He looked. And because he had spent 4 years training himself not to see her too closely, in case he saw something he could not have, he saw everything at once. The gray, under her eyes, the sleeve of her coat still damp at the cuff, a dark line of silt dried under the nails of her right hand, the fine black grit you only get down at the low water mark, on the mudflats east of the old canneries, 3 miles from any road. A place with no reason on earth to be at 5 in the morning, and at her throat, half hidden under her collar, a bootlace with a small brass key strung on it. He had never seen it before in his life. Why? He said. Because I have met someone, Verity said. It was the first lie she had ever told him. He knew it, the way you know. A false note in a song you have heard every day since childhood. He said, Where are your bags? And for 1/4 of a second, before she smoothed it flat again, something moved behind her face that looked a great deal like fear. Ambrose Teal had been the family's lawyer for 31 years, and he had the soft, apologetic voice of a man who has never once in his life had to be present for the consequences of his own advice. He laid the second copy of the petition on the desk in the study, on Caro Point at 10 minutes past 10. And he smiled at it the way a man smiles at a tidy sum. It is clean, Teal said. Extremely clean. She has waived spousal support in full. She has waived any claim on the estate, the shipping interests and the trust. She has asked for the contents of 1 storage unit and a bus ticket. He turned a page with 1 finger. Frankly, Ivo, I have never seen a settlement this favorable. Sign it, and it is finished by Friday morning. Friday, Ivo said. She has been quite specific about that. Friday? Cosima was standing at the window, with her arms folded, watching the pilot boats. Ivo's sister had her mother's jaw and none of her patience, and she had spent 4 years being unable to decide whether Verity was a servant or a rival, and had settled, in the end, on treating her as a piece of furniture that had been left in the room by the previous owners. Then sign it, Cosima said. Sign it, Ivo, and pour yourself a drink. She was the settlement of a dead man's debt. She was never a wife. She was a receipt. The pen was still in Ivo's hand. He was very careful with it. He set it down flat on the blotter, precisely parallel to the edge of the desk, because the alternative was to put it through something. Say that again, he said quietly. Cosima turned. She was not stupid. She saw the stillness. But she was a Kara's. And Karases have never in the history of the family known when to stop. She has no name and no people and no money, she said. She has never asked you for as much as a coat. That is not devotion, Ivo. That is a woman, keeping her head down until the door opens. The door is open. Let her go. Ivo stood up. 2 years ago, he said, when the Amaranth went down off the point with 9 of my men on her, who sat in the harbormaster's office for 16 hours and made the Coast Guard keep searching. Cosima said nothing. When our uncle was dying and would not take the morphine because he thought it was poison, who sat with him and drank from the same cup so that he would believe her? Ivo. When the Hallerans sent that boy to my table with a wire in his jacket, who noticed? Not my men. Not you. She poured him a glass of water and told me afterward that his hands were shaking and his shirt did not fit him, and that a man wearing a borrowed shirt to a dinner like that is a man who did not choose to be there. He came around the desk. She has never asked me for anything. You call that keeping her head down? I have 20 men on my payroll who would open a vein for that woman, and not one of them has ever seen her frightened. He stopped. Because he had seen her frightened this morning, for 1/4 of a second, over a cheap plastic pen. She has met somebody, Cosima said, gentler now, because gentleness was the only weapon she had left. That is all this is. She is a young woman, and she has been alone in this house for 4 years, and she has met somebody, and you are standing here making a speech about a wire in a jacket. Ivo picked up the petition, he read the header again. And then he read the small block of type at the very bottom of the last page, the part nobody reads, the address for the service of documents. It was not Carrow Point. It was a number on Slaughter Lane, down past the old canneries, on the East Flats, 3 miles from any road, where the black silt is. Ambrose, Ivo said, and his voice had not changed at all, which was how Ambrose Teal, who had known him since he was 9 years old, understood that something had gone badly wrong. Cancel the 10:30. Cancel the whole day. You have the Halloran lawyers at 4. Cancel them, Cosima said. You cannot cancel the Hallorans. That treaty is 19 months of your life. Ivo folded the petition once, lengthwise, and put it in the inside pocket of his coat, against his chest, where he could feel it. Laszlo, he called, and the door opened before the second syllable was out. Bring the car round. Where are we going, boss? Ivo was already walking. To find out who my wife is protecting, he said. The car went east along the water and the city fell away from it in stages, the way skin comes off a thing. First, the glass and the money, the new terminal, with its blue cranes standing in a row like herons. Then the working docks, oil and rust, and men in high-visibility jackets, who lifted a hand to the car without knowing who was in it, because everybody in Ashport knew that car. Then the container yards. Then the fence. Ivo sat with the folded petition against his chest and watched the ground go bad. The East Flats were the oldest part of the port and the only part nobody had ever managed to make money from. The canneries had closed before he was born, and the buildings were still there, 4 of them, long and low and windowless, their roofs gone to lace. Beyond them the land simply gave up. It sank. It became mud, a mile of it, gray-black and shining, cut through with channels that filled and emptied twice a day. And at high water, it was a sheet of brown sea, and at low water it was a plain of silt that would swallow a man to the hips and hold him there while the tide came back for him. 9 men from the Amaranth had gone into that water 2 years ago. 6 had come out. Ivo had not been down here since. Slow, he said. Laszlo slowed. The road stopped being a road. It became a track of broken asphalt, and then a track of gravel, and then 2 ruts and couch grass, and the car began to complain about it. Boss, Laszlo said carefully, there is nothing out here. There is a woman out here. He was thinking about the coat. Verity had 1 coat. She had money enough to buy 100, and she had 1. A heavy navy thing she had owned since before he married her. And every winter, he had watched her mend the same cuff with a needle in the kitchen at night, rather than replace it. He had thought it was thrift, he had thought it was pride, or the reflex of a poor childhood, or some small private stubbornness she was entitled to. The cuff had been wet this morning, salt wet, not rain. He thought about that, and his jaw set. And then he made himself go further back, because that was the thing about the truth. Once it started coming, it did not care whether you were ready. 3 weeks ago he had come down to the kitchen at 4 in the morning for water, and the house had been empty. He had stood in his own kitchen, and he had called her name twice, and got nothing. And then the side door had opened, and there she was, in the navy coat, with her boots in her hand. Could not sleep, she had said, walked down to the point. And he had said, all right, and gone back to bed. Because it was 4 in the morning, and he was tired, and the Halloran Treaty was eating him alive, and because a man believes a woman who has never lied to him, once. He had let it go once, and thought nothing of it, and gone to sleep. Now, he sat in the back of a car, on a dirt track, above a mile of killing mud, and understood that once is what a thing looks like when you are only counting the times you happen to be awake. His hands were shaking. He looked at them with a kind of remote surprise, the way you look at somebody else's hands. Ivo Kuras had put 4 men in the harbor and slept the same night. He had sat across a table from the Hellorans for 19 months with a smile on his face while they talked about his father. Nothing moved him. His hands were shaking. "Stop the car," he said. They had come out level with the second cannery. The track ran on toward a huddle of buildings at the far end. Low sheds behind a sagging chain-link fence. The kind of place where the city puts things it wants to forget it owns. Slaughter Lane. There had been an abattoir here 100 years ago, and the name had outlived everything it described. Ivo got out. The wind came off the flats, and it stank. Deep and green and rotten, mud and weed and old iron. It was the smell of the day they dragged the amaranth. He stood in it and breathed it and did not move. Because he had done something, in this moment that he had not done in 4 years. And he did it now, standing in the wind, with his eyes shut, and it hurt. He tried to remember the last time he had asked his wife a question about herself. Not a question about the harbor master, not a question about the numbers, or the Hallorans, or whether Teal was to be trusted, or which of his men were drinking. A question about her, where she went, what she wanted, whether she was all right. He could not find one. 4 years of sitting across a table from her every morning of his life. 4 years of watching her set his cup down at his right hand. And he had built his whole understanding of her out of the single most convenient fact available to him, which was that she never asked for anything, and he had let that fact mean the thing he wanted it to mean. She is fine. She does not need anything, she would tell me. Boss. Laszlo had got out too. He had a hand inside his jacket. Boss. You want me to call the men? No, there is no cover out here. Anything happens. We are standing in the open. I said no. Ivo opened his eyes. Out on the mud. A long way off, gulls were fighting over something. Nobody knows we came here. Nobody. Not Cosima, not Tiele, not one of my own. Do you understand me? Laszlo went very still, because he had worked for the Karas family for 11 years, and he had never once been told to keep a thing from Cosima. Yes, boss. Ivo started walking toward the sheds. He had gone perhaps 20 paces when he stopped and looked back at the water. The tide was out, right out. A mile of gray-black silt lay open to the sky, shining, and the channels in it ran like veins in a hand. And somewhere out in the middle of it, so far away that he could not have said what it was, something was moving. The lock on the shed door was new. That was the first wrong thing. Everything on Slaughter Lane was rotten. Every hinge, every gate, every strip of tin, and the padlock hanging from the hasp of the third shed was a heavy new brass thing, oiled, the shackle bright. She had bought a good lock. She had not bought a good pen. Ivo took the lock in his fist and looked at it, and then he stepped back and put his heel through the timber beside it, once, twice, and the wood, which was 100 years old and full of salt, gave up all at once and folded inward, and the lock and the hasp went with it, still fastened, still perfectly, uselessly locked. He stood in the doorway and did not go in. It was a single room, dry, swept. Somebody had taken a broom to a floor in a condemned shed on the East Flats, and that small housekeeping fact went into him like a splinter. There was a camp bed with a blanket folded square at the foot of it. There was a paraffin heater, unlit. There was a chair and a plank on 2 crates for a table, and on the table there was a thermos and a torch and a coil of blue rope and a roll of gray tape and a pair of gardening gloves so worn through at the palms that they were not gloves anymore. And there was a tide table. It was pinned to the wall, a printed sheet from the harbor master's office, the same sheet that hangs in every wheelhouse in Ashport, and every low water for the past 5 weeks had been circled in pencil. Circled and then crossed through, circled and crossed through. Day after day after day, going back and back, a small patient grid of somebody's nights. 5 weeks. Ivo put his hand flat on the table to steady himself, and it came away black. Silt. It was on everything. It was on the blanket, and the chair, and the handle of the thermos. Dried and fine. The same grit he had seen under her fingernails at his own breakfast table an hour and a half ago, while she stood there and told him she had met somebody. He looked at the wall above the bed. There were papers pinned to it, a great many of them. He crossed the room and he began to read, and the cold started in his chest and worked outward. They were his, not his organization's. His. The inquiry into the loss of the amaranth, all 40 pages of it, and the report he had paid for and read once and put in a drawer, because reading it twice would have finished him. The Coast Guard log for the night, the insurance assessment, the manifest, the crew list with 9 names on it, and besides 6 of the names somebody had written, in Verity's small upright hand, the words came back. Beside the other 3, there was nothing at all. And in the center of it, pinned through the middle, was a photograph of a boat, not the Amaranth, a tender, a small working launch, 40 feet, filthy, the name on her transom half gone. Somebody had circled the transom in red and written a question beneath it, and the question was, whose she was. Ivo stared at it. There had been no other vessel. That was the finding. That was the whole finding, the one he had paid a great deal of money to have written down, because the alternative was a war he could not win in the year his father died. The Amaranth had taken water in a heavy sea and gone down at the point, and it was nobody's fault, and 9 men had drowned, and nobody was to blame, and he had made himself believe it, because believing it was the only way to keep the rest of them alive. Nobody had ever asked him whose the tender was. Because nobody else had known there was a tender, Ivo turned round slowly. On the plank table, weighted flat, under the thermos, so the wind through the broken door could not take it, was a bus ticket. 1 passenger, 1 way, Providence, Friday. He picked it up. He held it in the same hand that held the folded petition, and he looked from one to the other, and the arithmetic assembled itself in his head, with a terrible quiet click. The divorce was final Friday morning. The Hallorans arrived Friday afternoon. The bus went to Providence, which was the Halloran city, on Friday night. She had not been leaving him for a man. She had been arranging, with great care and enormous patience, and 5 weeks of somebody's nights, to stop being a Karis exactly long enough to walk into the house of his enemies as nobody at all. Boss. Laszlo was in the doorway with his face gone the color of the mud. Boss, you need to see this. Ivo came out into the wind. Laszlo was pointing at the flats, and Ivo followed his arm, out and out, across the shining gray, past the channels, past the gulls, 1/2 mile, 3/4, to where the mud ended and the water began. Somebody was standing in it, up past the knees, bent right over, hauling on a rope, and behind her, coming in over the flat ground, the way it does out there, faster than a man can run, was the tide. He went out onto the mud. Laszlo shouted something behind him, and Ivo did not hear it. He went over the low bank and down, and his shoes were gone in the first 10 yards, sucked off, and he did not stop for them. The mud took him to the ankle, then the shin. It did not want to give his feet back. Every step was a fight with the ground itself, a wet, obscene sound. And he did it in a suit that cost more than the shed, and he did not once look down. She had not seen him. That was the thing that stayed with him afterward. That in all the time it took him to cross that 1/2 mile, with his lungs burning and his heart going like a fist on a door, she never once looked up, because she was working, and the tide was coming, and she did not have time. She was thigh-deep in a channel. She had a rope over her shoulder, run through a block hitched to an iron post that stood up out of the silt at an angle, an old mooring bollard from some pier that had rotted away before the war. She had her back to the post and her heels dug in, and she was hauling, hand over hand, and something down in the water was coming up an inch at a time. Her hands were wrapped in gray tape. That was what he saw first. Not the mud to her waist, not the wet hair stuck to her jaw, not the coat, the one coat, ruined past any mending. He saw the tape on her hands, wound round and round the palms, and where it had worn through he saw what was underneath it. Verity. She heard that. She turned her head and looked at him across 20 feet of gray water, with an expression he had never once seen on her face in 4 years, and it was not shame, and it was not fear, it was irritation. "You are going to lose those shoes," she said. "I already have." "Then do not stand there in the channel, it is soft." She turned back to the rope. She got another fist of it. She hauled. "Go and stand on the bank, and shout at me from there, Ivo. I can hear you perfectly well from the bank." He waded to her. The water was around his hips now, and it was so cold. It did not feel like cold. It felt like being gripped. He took hold of the rope above her hands. "Do not," she said sharply. "Do not. If you take it now, it will go back down, and I will not find it again. I have been 6 days finding it, and do you understand me? 6 days. Just hold. Just hold it. Do not pull. And let me set the block." So he held it. Ivo Karas stood up to his waist in the mud of the East Flats, holding a rope for his wife, because she had told him to, and she went past him with her ruined hands and reset the block on the bollard, and neither of them said anything at all, and behind them the tide came on across the flat. "Now," she said, and got back on the rope beside him. "Now, you can be useful." They hauled together. It came up out of the silt slowly, and then all at once the way drowned things do, and it broke the surface and the water ran off it, and it was a box, a strong box. Iron, no bigger than a bread tin, black with mud and furred with weed. And there was a chain through the handle of it, and the chain went down into the water and did not end, because the other end of the chain was still made fast to something down there in the dark that had been holding it for 2 years. Ivo looked at it. Then he looked at his wife. She was standing in the water, breathing hard with her hands hanging, and now that she had stopped, now that there was nothing left to haul, the thing she had been holding off with the work came up into her face all at once, and he watched it arrive. She was gray, not pale. Gray, the color of the mud, and her lips had no blood in them, and she was shaking so hard that the surface of the water around her was trembling, and she had been out here every low tide for 5 weeks in the dark and the cold alone. And then she had gone home and dried her hair and set his cup down at his right hand and asked him how the treaty was going. "How long?" he said. His voice did not work properly. "How long have you been coming out here?" "Since the night you told me the Hallorans wanted peace." "That was 5 weeks ago." "Yes, Verity." He could not get enough air. "Verity, your hands." She looked down at them mildly as though they belonged to a colleague. "They are only hands," she said, and then her knees went. He caught her. He got an arm under her and hauled her up against him, and she came up out of the water with no weight at all. None. And her head went down on his shoulder, and up close he could feel her heart going, small and fast and wrong. The way a bird's goes when you have it in your fist. "Ivo," she said, into his coat. "Ivo, listen, listen to me. Do not talk." "The box," she said. "You have to take the box. Not me, if it comes to it. The box. Verity, be quiet." "The key," she said. "The key is on the lace round my neck. And if I am not here on Friday, you have to open it yourself. And, Ivo, you have to promise me. You have to promise me you will not open it in front of your sister." The tide came in around his legs. He stood in the middle of a mile of drowning mud, holding his wife against his chest, with a rope in one hand and an iron box at his feet, and he looked down at her face and asked the only question left: "What is in the box?" "The name," she said, "of the man who sank the Amaranth." And then she stopped talking and did not start again. He got her to the bank with the box under one arm and his wife over the other, and the last 100 yards the water was at his chest, and the box was trying to take him down, and he would not put it down, because she had told him to take the box. Laszlo dragged them both up the mud and onto the grass. There was an old boathouse behind the third shed, roofless at one end, and Ivo carried her into it, out of the wind, and put her on the dry boards and went back for the paraffin heater and lit it with hands that would not work properly. And then he sat down on the floor beside her and pulled her against him and put his coat over both of them and held on. She came back slowly. He felt it happen. She had been somewhere a long way down, and she came up through it in stages. And the first thing she did when she surfaced was try to sit up and reach for the box. "No," Ivo said. "The seal is broken. If it dries out, the paper will go." "Verity. The paper is the whole thing, Ivo. If the paper goes, then 2 years of my life go with it. You have to keep it wet. You have to keep it in the water until we can get it to somebody who knows how to lift it." He put his hand flat on her sternum and held her down. She fought him for about 4 seconds. Then she stopped. All at once the way a rope goes slack, and she lay on the boards in a stranger's coat and looked up at the ruined roof. "You went in the shed," she said. "Yes." "You saw the wall?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Then you know," she said, "that I have been lying to you since the day I married you." The heater ticked. Out on the flats, the water was coming over the place where they had been standing, and it made no sound at all, which is the thing nobody understands about that water. It does not roar, it just arrives. "Tell me about the crew list," Ivo said. "You have read it. I read it once. 9 names. 6 of them came home. Say them." "Verity." "Say the 3, she said. "You are the man who sent them out." Then he said them, in order, the way they had been printed. Because he had read that list once, and never again, and had known it by heart every day since. "Marek Ostro Denit Phi Call Brannick." Call Brannick, she said, was 19 years old, and he had a stammer, and it went away when he sang. So he sang all the time, which everybody found extremely irritating. Her voice did not change at all. The wind came through the open end of the boathouse. Ivo did not move. He could not have said afterward how long he sat there. "Your name," he said, "is Brannick. It was your father owed my father money." "My father owed your father a great deal of money," Verity said. "And then my father died, and your family came to the house to see what was left. And what was left was me, and Call." She turned her head and looked at him. "You do not remember. There is no reason on earth you should remember. You were 29 years old, and you were 3 weeks into being a man whose father had just died, and there was a room full of your uncles telling you what the Brannock debt was worth. And you looked at me across that room and you said, 'She is not a payment, she is a person, and if she comes into this house, she comes as a wife, or she does not come at all.'" "I remember," Ivo said. "And I said yes," said Verity, "because if I said yes, my brother got a berth." The heater ticked. "I put him on that boat," she said. "You did not put Cole Brannock on the Amaranth, Ivo." "I did. I traded a marriage for a job, for a boy who could not read a tide table. And 2 years later, that boat went down at the point, and they brought back 6 of them, and they did not bring back mine." "Verity?" "And then," she said, "you paid for an inquiry." He shut his eyes. "It found nothing," she said. "Heavy sea water, in the hold. Nobody to blame. And I stood in the harbor master's office with the report in my hand, and I read the Coast Guard log, and there are 40 minutes in it. Ivo, 40 minutes between the engineer's first call and the last one. A boat that opens in a sea does not float for 40 minutes. She floats for 6, and then she goes. That boat was holed low and slow, and somebody stood off her and watched her do it. There was no other vessel. There was a tender," Verity said. "The Amaranth carried her own tender, a 40-foot launch, and she was not lost, and she was not found, and she is not in the report, and she is not on the insurance schedule, and in 4 years of living in your house nobody has said her name once." Ivo opened his eyes. "The bittern," he said. "The bittern," she said. "And I have been trying to find out who took her out that night, since the morning they brought back 6 of them and stopped looking. They were lying open on his coat, palms up, and the tape had come off in the water, and what was underneath was not a thing a man should have to look at. And she was talking about Coast Guard logs. 2 years, he said. You sat at my table. Every morning. You went through my books. You gave me your books, Verity said. You gave me the whole organization, Evo, and you did it because I was useful and I was quiet, and I never asked you for anything. And do you know why I never asked you for anything? She was shaking again, and it was not the cold. Because every single thing I took from you was going to be a debt, and I knew what I was going to do to you at the end of it. I was going to take a name out of the mud and I was going to put it in front of you, and it was going to cost you your family, and I could not do that to a man I owed. So I did not take the car, I did not take the money. I did not take a coat. She laughed, one dreadful cracked sound. Do you understand? I could not afford you. He could not speak. I sold my father's house, she said, and I paid a diver. He took the money and went out twice, and came back and told me there was nothing down there. He was lying. He had never gone in the water at all. I found that out afterward, and by then the money was gone, and there was never going to be any more money. She turned her face away. So, I learned to do it myself. It took me a year to learn the channels. It took me 5 weeks to find her. She is lying on her side in 11 feet, at low water half a mile out, and the engineer chained his logbook to the rail before he went. Ivo. He chained it to the rail, because he knew, because he wanted somebody to come and get it. Why now? Ivo said. His voice came out of somewhere far back in his chest. 5 weeks? Why 5 weeks? She looked at him. Because 5 weeks ago, she said, you came home and told me that the Hallorans wanted peace, and you were happy. I had never seen you happy. And I sat in that kitchen and I thought, if I put this name in front of him now, there will be no treaty, and there will be no peace, and there will be a war in this city. And every one of those 9 will have died for nothing, twice. So you were going to go alone. I was going to go on Friday, Verity said. As Verity Brannock, who is nobody, who is not a Kuraz, who has no husband, and no name, and no people. The divorce is final on Friday morning. The Hallorans arrive on Friday afternoon. The bus goes at 8. Evo's hand closed on the edge of his own coat. You were going to take the box to Providence, he said, and put it in front of Redmond Halloran. Yes. He would have killed you. Yes, said Verity. And that was the entire point. The heater ticked. She sat up. He let her this time, because he did not have the strength in his arms to stop her. If a Karis wife walks into that house with proof and dies there, this city burns, she said. If a nobody walks in and dies, it is a woman nobody knew, and there is no reprisal, and the treaty holds, and the name still gets said out loud in front of the only man with any reason to act on it. I did the arithmetic. Ivo. I did it 100 times. It was the cheapest way. The cheapest way. Yes, you costed your own death, Ivo said. Against a shipping treaty. I costed it, she said. Against you. She reached up. The lace was still round her neck, filthy, and she pulled it over her head with her ruined hands, and held it out to him, and the small brass key hung between them and turned slowly in the air. That is why I asked you for a divorce, she said. It is the only thing I have ever asked you for. It is the only thing I have ever asked anybody for, in my whole life. And I want you to sign it. Ivo, I want you to sign it today. He did not take the key. He got up instead, and he walked to the open end of the boathouse and stood in the doorway with the wind coming off the water, and he looked out at the flats, which were gone now, which were a sheet of gray sea with nothing on it at all, and he stood there long enough that Laszlo, waiting by the car, took one step forward. Then he took the petition out of his inside pocket. It was ruined. It had been in the water to his chest. The paper had gone soft and gray, and the ink had run in long blue tears down the length of it, and her name in the box at the top was a smear. He turned round and held it up so that she could see it. Ivo, she said. He tore it in half. He did it slowly, because wet paper does not tear cleanly, and the sound it made was small and wet and ugly, and he tore the halves again and again, and he let the pieces fall on the boards of the boathouse floor, and Verity watched him do it, with her hands hanging open in her lap. "You can have another one drawn up," she said. "By whom?" "By Teal." "Teal," said Ivo, "does not work for me anymore." He took out his phone. "What are you doing?" He did not answer her. He put the phone to his ear, and he watched his wife's face while it rang. And it was answered on the second ring, because when Ivo Karas calls the man he has been negotiating with for 19 months, the phone gets answered. "Redmond," he said. Verity said Ivo no. "Ivo." The voice on the other end was warm and slow and pleased with itself. "You are early. We do not sit down until Friday." "There is no Friday," Ivo said. The line went quiet. "There is no treaty," Ivo said. "There is no signing, there is no dinner, and there are no lawyers. 19 months, Redmond. You will want to know why. I am going to tell you, because I want you to hear it from me and not from a piece of paper somebody hands you in the dark." He looked at his wife, and he did not look away, and he said it. 2 years ago my ship went down at the point with 9 men on her, and it was not a heavy sea. Somebody stood off her in her own tender, and watched her fill. I did not know that this morning. I know it now. And I am not going to sit down at a table and shake anybody's hand until I know whose hand I am shaking. Ivo. The warmth had gone out of the voice entirely. "If you cancel this, you understand what you are doing." "Yes, 19 months. "Yes," said Ivo, "and 9 men." He ended the call. The wind came through the boathouse. Verity was sitting on the boards in his coat, with her mouth slightly open, and she looked, for the first time in 4 years, completely unprepared. "You have just put this city back in the water," she said. "Yes. For a box you have not opened." "For you," Ivo said. He crossed the floor and crouched down in front of her, and he took the lace out of her hand, and he did not put it over his own head. He put it back over hers and settled the key against her throat and closed her fingers around it, gently, because of what her hands were. "You said you could not afford me," he said. "Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to say this once, and then we are going to go and see a man about your hands. You have never owed this family anything. You were never a payment. And you are not going to Providence on a bus. Ivo, you are going to Providence," he said, "in my car, with my name on you, in the daylight, at the front, where every man in that house can see exactly who has come." He stood up. He picked up the iron box. "But not yet," he said. "First, we open it, and then I am going to go home and find out which of the people who kissed me at my father's funeral has been lying to me for 2 years." He did not take her to Caro Point. He took her instead to a low building above the fish quay, with no sign on it, where a man named Halden Voss had been putting the Chorus organization back together for 30 years in a room that smelled of iodine and pipe smoke. And Voss opened the door at 11 in the morning in his shirt sleeves and looked at the two of them, standing there covered to the chest in black silt, and did not ask a single question, which was why he had lived so long. He put her on the table. He cut the last of the tape off her hands, and he was very quiet while he did it. Ivo stood against the wall with the iron box at his feet and made himself watch. "How long?" Voss said at last. 5 weeks, Verity said. "I am not asking you." Voss did not look up. "I am asking him. And he does not know, which is why I am asking him." Ivo said nothing. Voss set down the scissors. "Her core temperature is somewhere it should not be," he said. "That is the least of it. Both hands are infected and the right one is going into the tendon, and if she had left it another week, she would have lost the use of it for the rest of her life. There is fluid in her chest. She has been breathing that mud for a month, and her lungs are full of it." He picked up her wrist and turned it over and put it down again. "She weighs about as much as a wet coat. When did she last eat?" Ivo opened his mouth. He had watched her stand at his table every morning for 4 years and pour his coffee. He had never once seen her eat. "You do not know," said Voss. "No," said Ivo. "No," Voss agreed. Do you know what I have been doing every second Tuesday for 2 years, Evo? I have been going out to the widows of the Amaranth, Ostro's mother, Phi's wife, and the child. There is a boy in a chair now. Did you know that? Dennett, Phi's boy. He has a chair with a motor in it and a ramp on the house. I pay for that, Ivo said. You do not, said Voss. Ivo went very still. You pay for a card at Christmas, Voss said, drying his hands. The chair was bought 2 years ago in cash by a woman who would not give her name, and the ramp was built by a man she paid in cash, and the rent on that house has been paid in cash every month since, and I have known who it was since the second month. Because I am not an idiot, and there are only so many women in this city who could put their hand on that kind of money. He hung the towel on its hook. She sold her father's house. Ivo. That is where the money came from. And then she gave what was left of it to a diver who robbed her, and after that there was no more money, and she went into the water herself. Ivo said, Verity. She was lying on the table with her eyes shut. It was not your money, she said. I did not take $1 of your money. Ask Ambrose. He balances the accounts. And Ivo Karas, standing against the wall of a doctor's room above the fish quay, felt the floor of his whole life tilt 1 degree to the left. Ambrose, he said slowly, balances the accounts. Ambrose has balanced the accounts for 31 years, said Verity, without opening her eyes. And the insurance schedule for the Amaranth was drawn by Ambrose, and the inquiry was filed by Ambrose, and I have been through every page of it 100 times. And there is not one line in that file with his name on it that should not be there. Nobody is that tidy, said Voss, who has nothing to be tidy about. There was a knock at the door. Laszlo came in with rain in his hair and his phone in his hand, and he did not look at the woman on the table. Boss, he said. 2 things, and you will want to sit down for one of them. Say them. The sheds on Slaughter Lane are on fire. All 4. It went up about 40 minutes after we left. Ivo did not move. And your sister has been calling the house every 10 minutes since 11 o'clock, asking where you are, Laszlo said. And boss, the last time she called, she did not ask where you are. He looked up. She asked whether you had opened it yet. The room went entirely quiet. On the table, Verity Karas opened her eyes and turned her head and looked at her husband, and for the first time all day she looked frightened. I told you, she said. I told you not to open it in front of your sister. She was off the table before Voss could get a hand on her. Lie down, Ivo said. No. Verity, you are going to send men for Ambrose Teal, she said. Do not lie to me. You have been standing there for 10 minutes deciding how many. Do not send them. He is the only lawyer who has touched that file. He is the only lawyer whose name is on that file, Verity said, which is not the same thing. And if you take him this morning, you take him with nothing in your hand, and he will sit in a room and say the word accident for 30 years, and there is not a court and not a table in this city where you can make it stick. She had the edge of the table in her fist. Voss had gone, still with the syringe in his hand, and did not attempt to interfere, because he had known this woman for 4 years and had never once heard her raise her voice. I have spent 2 years in the paper. You have spent 4 hours. Give me until the tide. He looked at her. Until the tide, he said. The box, she said. It went on the table where she had been lying. She would not let anyone else do it. She sat on Voss's stool with her bandaged hands in her lap, and she directed. And Voss cut the weed off the seam with a scalpel, and Ivo held the lamp. And she took the brass key off the lace with the 2 fingers that would still bend, and she put it in the lock herself. It did not turn. She waited. She turned it the other way. It opened. The smell that came out of it was the smell of the flats, only older and worse. Inside, packed tight and swollen, was a book, and it was not a book anymore. It was a brick 2 years in 11 feet of salt water had turned 300 pages of a ship's engineering log into a solid gray block. Fused, the edges soft as wet bread, Laszlo said quietly, Boss, there is nothing there. There is everything there, said Verity. She did not touch it. She leaned over it with her face 6 inches from the block and looked at the edges for a long time. Pump readings at the front, she said. That is the ruled paper. You can see the pattern of the rule in the block? It holds the ink better. He would have kept writing at the back, in the blank leaves, because that is where a man writes when he has run out of the thing the book was for. She sat back. The front is gone. Do not waste your time on the front. Get me distilled water, get me a scalpel, get me every sheet of glass in this building. You cannot lift wet paper, Foss said. It comes apart. It comes apart if you pull it, she said. It does not come apart if you float it. And she showed them. It took her 4 hours. She sat on a stool in a doctor's room with 2 ruined hands, and she floated the block in a dish of clean water. And she went in at the edge with the flat of the blade, and she took the back of that log apart 1 leaf at a time, and every leaf she lifted, she laid on a pane of glass and left to dry, and she did not stop, and she did not eat. And twice, Ivo put his hand on her shoulder to make her stop, and both times she said, without heat, without even looking round, not yet. Ivo Karas stood in that room for 4 hours and watched his wife do a thing he could not have done in 1,000 years. At 4:10 in the afternoon, she straightened up. There, she said. There was 1 page on the glass. The ink had bled to almost nothing, and what was left of it was brown, and there were 3 lines of a hand that had been writing in the dark on a boat that was going down. Ivo bent over it. Bitterness standing off at 200 yards, the engineer had written. She is showing no light. I have hailed her 4 times. And below that, in a hand that had begun to come apart, she is not coming. And below that, the last line the man ever wrote. Tell Ivo, it was nothing. It stopped. The page was clean below it, clean and brown and empty, and the man who had chained his logbook to the rail of a sinking ship so that somebody, someday, would come and get it, had run out of time by 2 words. Ivo put both hands on the edge of the table and leaned on them. He got the whole sentence, he said, except the only part of it that matters. He got the comma, said Verity. What? Look at the shape of it. He put a comma after it was. He knew he had 1 word left, and he spent his last movement telling us that a word was coming. She was not looking at the page. She was looking at Ivo, which I do not need. Because I do not need a dead man to tell me who took the bittern out. I have known that for 11 days. The room stopped. Say that again, Ivo said. I have known for 11 days, Verity said, and I did not tell you, and I am going to tell you now, and you are going to hate me for the order I did it in. She reached inside the ruined coat, which she had not let anybody take off her, and she brought out a plastic wallet, and inside it was a single sheet of paper, dry, folded twice. The bittern was signed out of the yard at 9:40 on the night the Amaranth went down, she said. There is a book at the gate. There has always been a book at the gate. It is the most boring document in the entire port, and no inquiry has ever looked at it in the history of this city, because it is not evidence of anything. It is a list of who took what. She put it on the table. There are 2 names on the line, she said. The man who signed her out, and the man who countersigned it, because a launch that size does not leave the yard on 1 signature. Ivo looked down. He looked for a long time. Ambrose Teal, he said. His voice had gone to nothing. And Cosima Karas, your sister, did not take the boat out, Verity said. I want to be very clear about that because it matters, and because when you go home tonight you are going to need to be sure. She signed a piece of paper in an office at 9 o'clock at night, and I do not believe she knew what she was signing. She sat back on the stool, but she has known what it meant since the day the inquiry was published, and she buried it. And she has been paying Ambrose Teal out of the household account ever since. 4,000 a month, she has hidden it in the flowers. Ivo, she has been hiding it in the flowers for the house. Ivo said, very quietly, why? Because if it came out, said Verity, then the Chorus family sank its own ship, and nobody would ever put a hull in your water again. She would rather have a brother with 9 dead men on his conscience than no family at all. Ivo straightened up. "And you knew this 11 days ago," he said. "Yes, and you did not tell me." "No," said Verity. "I did not tell you. I bought a bus ticket instead. Because I have loved you for about 3 years, Ivo, which is an extremely stupid thing for a woman in my position to have done, and I did not want to be the person who put that in front of you." She looked up at him with her ruined hands in her lap. "I wanted to be dead in Providence before you ever had to hear it." The phone in Laszlo's pocket went off. He answered it and listened, and his face did something Ivo had not seen it do in 11 years. "Boss," he said. "Ambrose Teal left his office 40 minutes ago. He has taken the ledgers. His car is on the airfield road." Ivo was already at the door. "He is going to the airfield," Laszlo said. "We can have men on that road in 12 minutes. "No," said Verity. She was still on the stool. She had not moved. She was looking at the leaf of the log, drying on its pane of glass, and her voice was so flat and so tired that Ivo stopped with his hand on the frame. "He is not going to the airfield," she said. "Verity, his car is on the airfield road." "His car is on the airfield road because that is the only road that leaves this city with a customs post at the end of it, and Ambrose Teal is carrying 31 years of ledgers out of his office by hand." She turned her head. "You cannot take paper through a customs post. You can take money through a customs post. You can take a man through a customs post. You cannot take 31 years of a man's handwriting through a customs post and expect a board official at 4 in the afternoon not to open the bag." Ivo came back into the room. "Then, why is he on that road?" "Because he wants you on that road." She lifted her chin at Laszlo. "Ask him how the office knew to call you." Laszlo went the color of paper. "His secretary called us," he said slowly. "She called us. She told us he had taken the ledgers." "Yes," said Verity. "The man has kept a secret in this city for 2 years without one slip. And today, on the one day it matters, his own office telephones you to tell you which road he is on." She closed her eyes. "He is buying an hour. He will drive to the airfield perimeter, and he will turn off before the gate, and then he will go where the paper can go, which is out." "Out, out by water," said Verity. "The same way it always goes out of this city." "Ivo, he has been paying a mooring fee for 11 years. The room went very quiet. "How do you know that?" Ivo said. "Because it is $440 a quarter and it comes out of the household account, under grounds maintenance," she said. "And I have looked at that line every 3 months for 4 years, and thought it was the gardener." She opened her eyes. "It is not the gardener. It is a berth, and it is not at the marina, because a man does not hide a boat where people look at boats. It is in your yard. He has been keeping a launch in your own yard for 11 years and billing you for the water it sits in." Ivo stood in the middle of the room and understood, with a kind of cold and total clarity, that the man who had drowned 9 of his people had spent 11 years hiding a boat in his own yard and sending him the bill for the water it sat in. "Laszlo," he said, "send 7 men to the airfield. Loudly. Use the open channel. Boss, the airfield is empty." "I know," said Ivo, and took his coat. "The Karis boatyard stands at the head of the North Channel, and there is one road in, and Ivo Karis had known that since he was 6 years old. He did not go to the airfield. He sent nobody to the airfield. He drove himself to the boatyard in the rain, and sat in the car, in the dark, with the engine off. At 9 minutes past 7 the gate lifted, and a gray saloon came down the access road with its lights off, and stopped at the slipway where a launch was already turning over with 2 men on the deck. Ambrose Teal got out with a leather case in each hand. "Ambrose," Ivo said. The old man turned round in the rain. For a moment he did not run, and he did not shout, and he did not put the cases down. He simply stood there in a good coat, on the concrete of a boatyard he had been coming to for 31 years, and he looked at Ivo Karas the way a man looks at weather. "They told me you were at the airfield," he said. "Everybody was told I was at the airfield." Teal nodded slowly, as though this were a point of law, and rather a good one. Ivo looked at the two leather cases hanging from the old man's fists. You did not run for your life, Ambrose, he said. You ran for those. Teal did not put them down. How much? Ivo said. I beg your pardon. 2 years I have been paying my sister's flower bill, so I am asking you how much. From the beginning, 31 years. How much did you take? Ambrose Teal stood in the rain and did a sum. And Ivo watched him do it, and watched the answer arrive on his face, and it was not the face of a man confronted with a monstrous crime. It was the face of a man who has been caught in something small and is embarrassed. About 900,000, Teal said, over 31 years. It is not as much as you think. It was never as much as you think. 900,000, Ivo said. It was the manifests, Teal said, and he was almost eager now, almost relieved, the way they always are at the end. 1/4% on the tonnage. Nobody would ever have known. Nobody could ever have known. It was under the rounding, Ivo. It was under the rounding for 31 years, and then somebody knew. Teal's mouth moved. The engineer, Ivo said, on the Amaranth. He was a careful man and he kept his own numbers, and one day he added them up, and he came to you, did he not? He came to you first because you were the lawyer, and he thought you were the honest one. He was going to go to your father, Teal whispered. My father was dead. He was going to go to you. Yes, said Ivo. He was going to come to me and tell me that the family lawyer had been taking 1/4%, and I would have taken it out of your pension and put you on a boat to somewhere warm, because you buried my father and you taught me to swim. His voice did not rise. It never rose. That is what would have happened, Ambrose. You would have been embarrassed. You would have had to move house. Teal did not answer. You put 9 men in the water, Ivo said, so that you would not have to be embarrassed. There were supposed to be 2, Teal said. And that was the worst thing anybody said out loud on that concrete in the rain, and he heard it himself as it came out of him, and he shut his eyes. It was a heavy sea, he said. I only meant to open her low. I only meant to slow her. The rest of it was the sea, Ivo. I stood off in that boat and I hailed them. I did hail them. You showed no light, said Ivo. Teal set down the cases. She was going to take it to Providence, he said. Your wife? Your quiet little wife? And I thought, well, there it is. She will be dead by Saturday, and it will be nothing to do with me. He looked up, and there was something almost imploring in it. A secretary, a widow's daughter, a woman who married a debt. Ivo, be reasonable. Look at what she is. Ivo Karaz stepped forward into the light of the slipway. My sister, he said. Called her a receipt. Teal said nothing. She was never a receipt, said Ivo. She is the only person in this family who ever paid. He did what he had come to do, and he did it quietly, the way it is done in Ashport, and he did not feel anything at all, which he had been warned about all his life and had never once believed until it happened. Then he stood in the rain for a while, and the men came up the slipway and took the cases, and nobody spoke. Cosima was waiting for him at Caro Point. She was standing in the study by the window with her arms folded, and she had been crying, and had stopped, and there was a suitcase in the hall. I did not know, she said. Ivo. I did not know what I was signing. No, said Ivo. But you knew what it meant, and you have known for 2 years, and you sat at my table, and every morning you watched that woman pour my coffee, and you called her a piece of furniture. She has taken everything from us. She has given us the only 2 years of truth this family has had in 31. He walked past her to the desk and stood there with his knuckles on the wood. You have the boat and the money in your own name, and the flat in Lisbon. You will be on the water tonight, and you will not come back into this city. And Cosima, look at me. If I ever hear that you have spoken her name to anybody, anywhere, I will not send anybody. I will come myself. She stood there a long moment. She will never love you, Cosima said. You know that. Whatever she has told you today, you were the man who owned her. I know, said Ivo. and he turned his back on his sister and walked out. He did not drive back to the fish quay, not at first. He drove north instead, out past the container yards to a street of small houses behind the gasworks, and he parked across the road from a door with a light burning over it at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he sat there. There was a ramp. It ran up from the pavement to the front door, in a long shallow slope, and somebody had built it properly, with a handrail, and the handrail had been painted, and somebody had painted it again since, because the first coat had gone at the joints and the second coat had not. Ivo Karas sat in his car and looked at a wooden ramp for a very long time. He had signed Dennet Phi on himself. He had shaken the man's hand on the kai with the ink still wet. And he had sent a card at Christmas, every year, 2 years running, with his name printed on it by a company in the city that prints such things, and he had never once driven down the street. The door opened. A woman came out onto the ramp in a coat over her nightclothes, and stood at the top of it with her arms folded, looking at the car, the way a woman looks at a strange car outside her house at 2 in the morning, in that part of Ashport. Ivo got out. He stood in the road with the rain coming down on him, and he did not know what he had come to say, because there was nothing to say, and he had known that before he turned the wheel. "You are the Karas," she said. "Yes. You have never been here." "No," said Ivo. She looked at him a moment longer. "The woman comes," she said. "The one who will not give her name. She came in November when the boy had a chest thing, and she sat up with him, and she would not tell me who she was, and she has hands like a docker, and she talks like a clerk. She pulled the coat tighter. Is she yours?" Ivo opened his mouth and found that he had to wait a moment before anything would come out of it. "She is my wife," he said. The woman on the ramp did not say anything at all for a while. "Well," she said at last, "then you have got something." And she went in and shut the door and left the light burning over it. And Ivo Karas stood in the road, in the rain, outside a house he had paid nothing toward, in front of a ramp he had not built, and let himself understand exactly what he was. Then he got in the car and drove to the fish quay. He came back to the room above the fish quay at 20 past 4 in the morning, with his coat over his arm and his hands scrubbed raw, and the light was still on. Verity was sitting up in the bed by the window, with her hands in fresh dressings, and a blanket over her knees, and she had a sheet of glass balanced on the blanket, with a leaf of the log drying on it, because of course she did. She looked up. She did not ask. That was the thing he would think about for the rest of his life. She did not ask. He sat down on the edge of the bed. "Ambrose is finished," he said. "Cosima is on a boat. She will not come back." Verity closed her eyes for a moment. "Say the number to me," she said. "The one he took. 900,000. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. "9 men," she said, "for 1/4%. Yes." "It is so small," she said. "Ivo, it is so terribly small." And then she cried, for the first time in 4 years, for about 11 seconds. And then she stopped, and wiped her face on the back of her wrist because her hands were bandaged, and said, "I am sorry. That was inefficient." The phone rang at 7. It was Redmond Halloran, and Ivo took the call standing at the window, with the light coming up gray over the harbor and his wife asleep behind him. "Ivo," said Halloran, "I have had a very long night. I have had men in my house telling me that you cancelled a treaty over a ghost story. And I have had one man in my house telling me a great deal more than that, because your lawyer, it turns out, has been selling my tonnage figures as well as yours." "I know," said Ivo. "I sent you his books an hour ago." There was a long silence on the line. "You sent me your own lawyer's books." "I sent you everything," Ivo said. 31 years of it, yours and mine. You will find the bittern in there, and you will find what happened to the amaranth, and you will find that no Karas ordered it, and no Halloran ordered it, and that we have both been fed on by the same mouth for 30 years. And what? said Halloran slowly. Do you want? Nothing, said Ivo. The treaty is dead. I killed it. If you want to come and take my ports, come and take them and I will be waiting on the quay. He watched a pilot boat come round the point. But you asked me for peace for 19 months. And I am telling you now that peace was never yours to give and never mine to take, because we were never at war, we were being farmed. So, I am not going to sign a piece of paper with you, Redmond. I am going to send you the truth for nothing, and let you decide what kind of man you are. Another silence. Longer. 19 months, Halloran said at last. And you throw it away, and then you hand me the only weapon you have, and you ask for nothing. Yes, why? Ivo looked at the bed. Because somebody taught me, he said, what it cost to be owed. He put the phone down. There was no war in Ashport after that, and there was no treaty either, and the men who write these things down have never been able to explain it, and it does not matter. She woke at 9. He had put the tin of butterscotch on the table beside her, the dented tin with the soft hinge, because Laszlo had gone back to Caro Point in the night, and Ivo had told him to bring 3 things, and nothing else. Verity looked at it for a while. You never once said, she said. No. 4 years. I thought that if I said it you would stop doing it. She laughed, and it hurt her chest, and she put a bandaged hand flat against her ribs. He put the second thing on the table. It was a photograph. There was a storage unit in the settlement, Ivo said. 1 unit. It was the only thing in that entire document you asked me for, and I read it 3 times and I could not work out what a woman keeps in a place like that. So I sent Laszlo, and he stood there and he called me, and he said, Boss, there is nothing in here. There is 1 box. There is a boy's coat and a school certificate, and about 40 photographs of the same boy. Verity looked at the photograph of her brother, 19 years old, singing. She did not say anything for a long time. He was so irritating, she said. I know. Marek Ostrow used to threaten to put him over the side. She looked up sharply. You knew him. Verity, said Ivo. I knew all 9 of them. I signed every one of them on myself. He sat down. I have not been able to say their names out loud in this city since the day it happened. You made me say 3 of them yesterday, standing in a boathouse. And it was the first time in 2 years that they were people, and not a number in a report I paid a man to write. And then he took out this 3rd thing. He put it on the blanket between them. It was her wedding ring, which she had left on the kitchen table under the folder at 7 o'clock the previous morning, and which he had gone back into that house in the dark to find. I am not going to put that on you, Ivo said. I have never given you a choice about anything in 4 years, and I find that I am not able to start now by giving you one and then standing over you while you make it. He stood up. So it is going to sit there, and you are going to get well, and Halden is going to feed you, and you are going to stay in this city as a free woman, with your own money and my name on nothing at all. And if in a year you want to put it on, you will put it on, and if you want to leave, Laszlo will drive you. And you will never in your life owe me a single thing again. He went to the door. Ivo, Verity said. He stopped. The account, she said. The one you opened for me, 4 years, and I never touched a dollar of it. I know. I want to take it out, she said. All of it. And I want to put it in the names of 6 women and 1 boy and a chair today. This morning, before I do anything else. Ivo stood in the doorway with his hand on the frame. That, he said, is the 2nd thing you have ever asked me for. Yes, ask me for a 3rd. Verity Brannock looked at the ring on the blanket for a long moment. Then she picked it up in 2 bandaged fingers, and she held it out to him, and she said, the only unnecessary thing she had ever said in her life. Put it back on, she said. You will make a mess of it. You always do. He crossed the room. She had never asked him for anything in 4 years, because everything she took would have become a debt, and she had known from the very beginning what she was going to do to him in the end. And in the end she did it. She took a name out of the mud, and she put it in front of him, and it cost him his sister and his lawyer, and 19 months of his life, and every certainty he had ever owned. And when it was done, he knelt down beside a bed, in a room above a fish quay, and he put the ring back on the hand of the only person who had ever paid. That is what happens when the quietest person in the room is the only one keeping the books. Verity never asked Ivo for a single thing in 4 years, and the one time she did, she was asking him to let her die quietly so that his city could stay standing. That is what he could not forgive, and that is what he could not walk away from. If you want more slow burn stories where the quiet one turns out to be the strongest person in the room, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me the exact moment you knew Verity was never going to Providence. See you in the next one.